All this comes as Qatar confirms this morning that Hamas and Israel have agreed on a humanitarian pause in Gaza after weeks of negotiations mediated alongside US and Egypt. The Israeli government approved the deal after a lengthy cabinet meeting and deep internal divisions amongst ministers. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says agreement does not mean that the war will stop. Now, as part of the deal, 50 women and children, captives held in Gaza, will be released in exchange for some Palestinian women and children who will be freed from Israeli prisons. The humanitarian pause will also allow the entry of a large number of aid convoys, including fuel for humanitarian needs. Well, we have correspondents across the region covering the story. Osama Bin Javaid is standing by in Doha on the diplomatic effort. Sara Khairat is in Occupied East Jersualem on the political divisions in Israel. And we have John Hendren in Washington with US reaction. Let's first cross to Tarek Abu Azzoum, who is in Gaza. Tarek, so I want to start with the strikes that have continued, not just overnight, but in the last few hours.
Yes, the Israeli strikes had intensified during the last couple of hours across the Gaza Strip, including the north and even the southern areas of the besieged territory, starting from the south of the Gaza Strip, in particular in a Nusayrat refugee camp, where a residential building has been completely destroyed by the occupation forces, claiming the lives of around 9 Palestinians till this very moment, as the occupation forces had also targeted several areas across the territory, including in the north of the Gaza Strip, where the vicinity of Kamal Adwan Hospital in the north of Gaza Strip had been widely attacked by the Israeli forces. The also confrontations on the ground between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli occupation forces continued in different axes, where the airstrikes had been intensified, targeting an ambulance vehicle while it was evacuating victims from the north of the territory, where also a civil defense crew had been attacked throughout an Israeli shelling during the last couple of hours. These airstrikes came as both parts, we're talking about Hamas and the Israeli side, had reached a ceasefire agreement, as they have clearly announced earlier, which also gives us a clear indication that the rates of the Israeli strikes today might intensify before the arrival of this agreement to be healed between both sides.
And Tarek, what reaction has there been on the ground to this temporary ceasefire? Presumably humanitarian relief can't come soon enough.
Yes, after the announcement by different officials belonging to Hamas political bureau, and with the statement of the Qatari Foreign Ministry related to the arrival to heal a short-term ceasefire between Hamas and the Israeli occupation that will be conducted and carried out over 4 days, in which the Palestinian fighters from the Gaza Strip will release 50 hostages from the Israeli captives, including young children and women, and in return Israel will release a number of Palestinian detainees in the occupation jails, including young children and women, over 4 days. This short-term ceasefire gives a hope for Palestinians related to the end of this war, as Israel also will allow the flow of humanitarian aid and fuel to the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, people here in the territory were witnessing very dire situation and circumstances over the last couple of weeks of fighting between Israel and Hamas, and in fact a kind of ceasefire will give a glimmer of hope for Palestinians that this war will end, as they want to go back again to the houses in order to check their lands and even to pull the victims from under the rubbles across the Gaza Strip.
OK, Tarek Abu Azzoum there for us in Khan Yunis. Let's speak now to Osama Bin Javaid. He is in Doha. Osama, Qatar, of course, critical in bringing about this deal. What are the details that you are hearing about the contents of this deal?
Well, it is the biggest diplomatic development that we've seen in the last 47 days of this relentless bombardment that we've seen on Gaza. You've heard from Hamas fighters saying that they are going to abide by this agreement as long as there is going to be a mutual respect of this agreement. They're saying that they've heard the statement from Benjamin Netanyahu saying this does not mean that the war is going to end, and they are going to have their fingers on the trigger, so to speak, as well, if there are any violations. But in these 4-day truce, guns are supposed to fall silent. There should be no more arrests. People should be allowed to move from the northern part of Gaza towards the south using Salahuddin Street freely. It also says that there are going to be 50 captives that they are going to release in exchange for 150 women and children. And Hamas has made it clear that this is civilian captives that they are talking about releasing. It does not include any soldiers. And also the people who are going to be released by Israel are going to be women and children. Worth noting that there are thousands and thousands of Palestinians who remain languishing in Israeli jails, and there are more who've been picked up in the last 47 days as well. So this deal will also include a cessation of monitoring using drones and other aerial vehicles that Israel deploys in Gaza. It will mean, according to Hamas, that there will be no more spying or satellite observing in the southern part, and there's going to be a cessation for a few hours at least in the northern parts of Gaza as well. And then obviously there is going to be no arrests and fighting as well. But again, this has all come from Hamas. So far, we've not heard a lot of details from the Israeli side. And it's going to be 24 hours before this prisoner exchange takes place that they're going to announce the names. And the Israeli side is going to announce the names of the people it's going to release as well.
And Osama, talk us through some of the diplomacy that's been involved in making this deal happen. I mean, it's not something that's come about overnight. It's taken weeks and weeks of intense negotiating.
Absolutely. It's been a roller coaster, as one diplomat put it to us, of coming close to a deal and going away from it. And it has to be said that Qatar has been pivotal in trying to make sure that this deal happens. What the Qatari side has been saying, that yes, it welcomes the development of this prisoner exchange and the cessation of hostilities. But what is more significant is the allowing in of aid that hundreds of trucks of aid are going to be allowed through, as it's been sending, and other countries have been sending aid towards the Rafah crossing in Egypt, and that is where all the aid is going to come from as well. So a major diplomatic breakthrough. Qatar has also thanked the United States for exerting its influence on Israel and the Egyptians for being part of this deal. But again, early days, we're still waiting to hear the basics, and as it's going to come into action, it is going to be announced the timings of that particular truce.
Osama Bin Javaid there for us in Doha. Let's speak now to Sara Khairat, who is in Occupied East Jerusalem. So in intense negotiation overnight. We didn't hear from the Israeli cabinet till the early morning. There was some opposition. Talk us through how the vote finally came through.
Yeah, it started later on in the night, and it took more than 6 hours, not just for the vote, but debating, because you had many members of the cabinet that was against this deal right from the start. You had the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, as well as the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who have been dead against it. They said that all of this time they've been warning Israel against any kind of not just negotiations, but before this, clamping down on Palestinians. And they said that this could allow more prisoners to be released, prisoners they said that should actually be receiving the death penalty, because that is what Itamar Ben-Gvir has been pushing for in the last few months. So a lot of political wrangling. But interestingly, Smotrich, the finance minister, he changed his mind. His party changed their mind. Initially, they went in saying, absolutely, this will not go through. We will vote against it. And then they voted for it, saying that they realized, having debated it, that it was in the national interest for Israel and to ensure the return of those held hostage, which is not just the only goal. The war isn't just the only goal against Hamas, but also those captives. In the last couple of hours, we've also been hearing from the Justice Ministry, which has released a list of prisoners, the name of those those that will be released. 300, interestingly, because 150 we know will be released in exchange for those 50 captives. But this could elude, the reason why they're releasing these names, being 300, so double, is that if Hamas releases 10 more captives, they will receive an extension in terms of pause of fighting more than those 4 days, and as well the release of more prisoners. So in a way, this is a push from Israel to encourage Hamas to do so.
Very interesting, Sara. And you mentioned the families of those captives. Of course, this news must bring some relief. Has there been much reaction from them?
Huge relief in some ways, only in the perspective that they feel that their pressure on the government potentially has helped towards these negotiations. They said that they'd been left out of the dark, but their marches and their protests and being very vocal about it, also on Israeli media, they think may have had something to do with this. But there's real worry because Hamas will only be releasing the names of those that will be released the day before. So the families will be waiting to find out if their members are being released. And of course, that's a big concern. The other concern for them is that some of those being held are not just by Hamas, but also Islamic Jihad. And in a few weeks ago, some of them had said that they didn't know where all those that are held captive were. So again, this is going to be a very nerve-wracking time for the families, as some of them, I'm sure, will find out that their loved ones won't be released just yet.
Thank you for that, Sara Khairat, there for us in Occupied East Jerusalem. We can turn now to John Hendren to get the view from the United States. John, so I wonder how significant you think it is that we did get a statement from the United States, from President Biden, but that only came after the Qataris had released a statement.
That's right. The U.S. administration official actually spoke to reporters before that announcement was made by Qatar, but it was embargoed for reporting. We weren't allowed to say anything about it until the Qatari announcement was made. And that's because the U.S. was grateful for Qatar's role. That is, Qatar can do something that the U.S. simply can't do, and that is talk directly to Hamas. And that's what they needed to happen. And the Biden administration is grateful that something has happened, that there has been some progress on this, not just because there are 3 Americans among those 50 plus to be released. One of them is a 3-year-old named Abigail, whose birthday is on Friday. But the Biden administration really wants something to happen on this because Biden's popularity has really tanked in polls across the U.S. There was widespread support for Israel initially after the October 7th attacks, but that has waned, and most of the protests you've seen across the U.S. are pro-Palestinian lately. There are on both sides, but there are some huge pro-Palestinian protests, and polls have shown that Biden has really taken a hit, that he's actually gone from being ahead of his presumed rival Donald Trump, the Republican, in the 2024 presidential elections to being behind him. Not that that has necessarily driven it, but we've seen statements across the Biden administration praising this move. They're clearly grateful.
OK, thank you for that. John Hendren there for us in Washington, D.C.